The Romance of Alexander is any of several collections of legends concerning the mythical exploits of Alexander the Great. The earliest version is in the Greek language, dating to the 3rd century. Several late manuscripts attribute the work to Alexander's court historian Callisthenes, but the historical person died before Alexander and could not have written a full account of his life. The unknown author is still sometimes known as Pseudo-Callisthenes. The text was transformed into various versions between the 4th and the 16th centuries in medieval Greek, Latin, Armenian, Syriac, Hebrew and most medieval European vernaculars. Versions of the Romance. Alexander was a legend during his own time. In a now-lost history of the king, the historical Callisthenes described the sea in Cilicia as drawing back from him in proskynesis. Writing after Alexander's death, another participant, one Xicrates, invented a tryst between Alexander and Thalestris, queen of the mythical Amazons. Throughout antiquity and the Middle Ages, the Romance experienced numerous expansions and revisions exhibiting a variability unknown for more formal literary forms. Latin, Armenian, Georgian and Syriac translations were made in late antiquity. The Latin Alexandrius of Walter of Chatillon was one of the most popular medieval romances. A 10th-century Latin version by one Leo the Archpriest is the basis of the later medieval vernacular translations in all the major languages of Europe, including Old French, Middle English, Early Scots, Italian, Spanish, Central German, Slavonic, Romanian, and Hungarian. The Syriac version generated Middle Eastern recensions, including Arabic, Persian, Ethiopic, Hebrew, Ottoman Turkish, and Middle Mongolian. The story of Dul-Kamine in the Quran matches the Gog and Magog episode of the Romance, which has caused some controversy among Islamic scholars. Alexander was identified in Persian and Arabic language sources as Dul-Kamine, Arabic for the horned one, likely a reference to the ram horns the image of Alexander wears on coins minted during his rule to indicate his descent from the Egyptian god Amun. Islamic accounts of the Alexander legend, particularly in Persia, combined the Pseudo-Callisthenes material with indigenous Sasanian Middle Persian ideas about Alexander. Greek versions. The oldest version of the Greek text, the Historia Alexandri Magni, can be dated to the 3rd century. It was subjected to various revisions during the Byzantine Empire, some of them recasting it into poetical form in medieval Greek vernacular. Recensio Alpha is the source of a Latin version by Julius Valerius Alexander Polemius, and an Armenian version. Most of the content of the Romance is fantastical, including many miraculous tales and encounters with mythical creatures such as sirens or centaurs. Recensio Alpha 5 Recensio Vetusta. W. Crawl, Historia Alexandri Magni, Volume 1. Berlin, Weidmann, 1926. Recensio Beta L. Bergson, Der Griechische Alexandroman, Stockholm, Almco Vista Amp, Wixell, 1965. Recensio Beta L. Bergson, Der Griechische Alexandroman. Recension Beta, Stockholm, Almco Vista Amp, Wixell, 1965. Recensio Beta L. Bergson, Der Griechische Alexandroman, Stockholm, Almco Vista Amp, Wixell, 1965. Recensio Gamma U von Lauenstein, Der Griechische Alexandroman. Recensio Gamma H. Engelmann, Der Griechische Alexandroman. Recensio Gamma F. Parth, Der Griechische Alexandroman. Recensio Delta G. Borlera, Frammentione T. della Perduta Recensione Delta del Romanzo di Alessandro in un Codice Vaticano, Bollettino del Comitato per la Preparazione dell'Edizione Nazionale dei Classici Greci e Latini 13. Recensio Epsilon J. Trumpf, in onomi Byzantini vita Alexandri Regis Macedonim, Stuttgart, Tjoibner, 1974. Recensio lambda, H. van Thiel, Die Recension lambda des Pseudo-Callisthenes Bonn, Hebelt, 1959. Recensio lambda H. The Van Thiel, Die Recension lambda des Pseudo-Callisthenes Bonn, Hebelt, 1959. Recensio lambda H. Van Thiel, Die Recension lambda des Pseudo-Callisthenes Bonn, Hebelt, 1959. Recensio F. Vernacular, VL Konstantinopoulos Anasi Lollis, Ps. Callisthenes zwei mittelgriechische Prosafassungen des Alexandromans, 2 vols. Recensio Phi. G. Veladis, Phi Upsilon Lambda Lambda Alpha Delta Alpha Tau Omicron Mu Epsilon Gamma Alpha Lambda Epsilon Xi Alpha Nu Tau Rho Omicron Upsilon Delta Iota Eta Gamma Rate the Sigma out of Sigma Lambda Epsilon Xi Alpha Nu Delta Rho Omicron Upsilon Tau Omicron Mu Alpha Kappa Epsilon Delta Omicron Nu Omicron Sigma. Recensio Byzantina Poetica, S. Reichmann, Das Byzantinische Alexander Gedicht nach dem Codex Marcianus 408 herausgegeben. Recensio E. Vernacular, VL Konstantinopoulos Anasi Lollis, Ps. Callisthenes, zwei mittelgriechische Prosa. Fassungen des Alexandromans, 2 vols. Recensio V. K. Mitsakis, Der Byzantinische Alexandroman nach dem Codex Vind. Thiel, Gr. 244. Recensio K. Vernacular, K. Mitsakis, Delta Iota Eta Gamma Rate the Sigma out of Sigma Pi Epsilon Rho Tau Omicron Lambda Epsilon Xi Alpha Nu Delta Rho Omicron Upsilon Kappa Alpha Tau Nu Mu Epsilon Gamma Alpha Lambda Omega Nu Pi Omicron Lambda Epsilon Mu Omega Nu. Byzantinisch Neugriechisch Jahrbucher 20. Recensio Poetica Vernacular, D. Holton, Delta Iota Eta Gamma Rate the Sigma out of Sigma Tau Omicron Lambda Epsilon Xi Alpha Nu Delta Rho Omicron Upsilon. The Tale of Alexander, the rhymed version. French versions. There are several Old and Middle French and one Anglo-Norman Alexander romances. The Alexandra of Alberic de Briançon was composed around 1120. For Erdegades by a certain Eustache, later used by Alexandre de Bernay and Thomas de Kent. Decasyllabic Alexander, anonymous from 1160 to 70. Mort Alexander, an anonymous fragment of 159 lines. Les Romans d'Alexander, attributed to clergyman Alexandre de Bernay, is based on the translations of various episodes of the conqueror's life as composed by previous poets. Unlike other authors of the era who undertook the Alexander saga, he did not base his work on the Pseudo-Callisthenes or on the various translations of Julius Valerius's work, as is common in medieval literature. The project results from the desire to improve on the work of others and to offer the complete life of the hero to the public, a theme that is also very present in the cycles of the chansons de gesta at the time. It should be noted that Thomas de Kent also penned the very same decade a version of the saga Le Roman de toute chevalerie, which is independent of Alexandre de Bernay's poem. Alexander's influence on the medieval imagination is thus shown as being as great as, if not greater than, that of other pagan figures such as Hercules or Aeneas. Thomas de Kent, around 1175, wrote the Anglo-Norman Roman de toute chevalerie, which became the basis for the Middle English King Alexander, La Vengeance Alexander by Jehan Le Nevelon. The Alexander en Orient of Lambert de Tort was composed around 1170, La Vengeance Alexander by Guy de Cambrai, before 1191. The Roman d'Alexander en prose was the most popular Old French version, anonymous, prized to differ from Picardy c. 1250. The Voyage d'Alexandre au Paradis Terrestre is a French adaptation of the Latin Iter ad Paradisum. The vow cycle of Alexander romances includes the Vers du Paon by Jacques de Longuyon, Reste du Paon by Jean Lecourt, and Parfait du Paon by Jean de la Motte. The Fête et les Conquestes d'Alexandre le Hutt by Jean Walker c. 1448. The Faits et Conquestes du Noble Roi Alexandre is a late medieval prose version. The Faits du Grand Alexandre by Vasque de Lucene is a prose translation of Quintus Curtius Rufus's Historia Alexandri Magni. English versions. In medieval England, the Alexander romance experienced a remarkable popularity. It is even referred to in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where the monk apologizes to the pilgrimage group for treating a material so well known. However, unlike the indigenous legend of King Arthur and the related romances dealing with the matter of Britain, the Alexander romance neither confines itself to the history and culture of Western Europe, nor is it a story situated in the Middle Ages. There are 5 major romances in Middle English which have been passed down to us, and most remain only in fragments. There are also 2 versions from Scotland, one which has sometimes been ascribed to the early Scots poet John Barber, which exists only in a 16th century printing, and a Middle Scots version from 1499, King Alexander from c. 1275. In medieval orthography, king could be king, and Alexander could be Alexander. The Romance of Alexander, sometimes referred to as Alexander A, is a fragment of 1247 lines and written in alliterative verse. It was probably written between 1340 and 1370, soon before the beginning of the alliterative revival, of which it is believed to be one of the oldest remaining poems. It has been preserved in a school notebook dating from 1600. Alexander A deals with the begetting of Alexander by Nectanebus, his birth and early years, and ends with the midst of the account of Philip's siege of Byzantium. It is likely that the source for this fragment has been the I² recension of the Historia de Preliis, beside that it has been expanded with additional material taken from Paulus Orosius's Historia Adversum Paganos. The adverse remarks, which are typical of Orosius, however, have been omitted by the poet, whose main concern is Alexander's heroic conduct. Alexander and Dindymus, sometimes referred to as Alexander B, is also written in alliterative verse. This fragment is found in the MS Bodley 264 and consists of 5 letters which are passed between Alexander and Dindymus, who is the king of the Brahmins, a people of philosophers who shun all worldly lusts, ambitions and entertainments. In this respect, the way of life resembles the ideal of an ascetic life, which was also preached by medieval monastic orders, such as the Franciscans. The source of Alexander B again is the I² recension of the Historia de Preliis. The Wars of Alexander, sometimes referred to as Alexander C, is the longest of the alliterative versions of the Middle English Alexander romances. It goes back to the I³ recension of the Historia de Preliis and can be found in the MS Ashmole 44 and in the Dublin Trinity College MS 213. Although both manuscripts are incomplete, they supplement each other fairly well. In this version, much space is given to letters and prophecies, which often bear a moralizing and philosophical tenor. The letters are an integral part of the Pseudo-Callisthenes tradition. The dominant theme is pride, which inevitably results in the downfall of kings. In the Wars of Alexander, the hero is endowed with superhuman qualities, which shows in the romance insofar as his enemies fall to him by the dozens and he is always at the center of action. The prose life of Alexander, copied by Robert Thornton, c. 1440. The Buick of Alexander, anonymous, attributed to John Barber, dates to 1438 according to its first printed edition from 1580. The Buick of King Alexander the Conqueror by Gilbert Hay, 1499. This work is in Middle Scots. Jewish versions. Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews mentions that Alexander visited Jerusalem and saluted the high priest, saying that he had seen him in his dreams back in Macedonia. The Talmud also has many legends relating to Alexander. For example, it mentions that the Samaritans conspired for the destruction of the temple, but Alexander prostrated at the feet of the high priest Simon the Just. It also mentions many other legends on Alexander, such as the 10 Questions of Alexander to the Sages of the South, his journey to the regions of darkness, the Amazons, the gold bread, Alexander at the gate of paradise, his ascent into the air and descent into the sea. There is also the legend of the Egyptians suing the Jews before Alexander. Christian and Islamic versions. The Syriac, Persian, Arabic, Ethiopic and Bulgar versions of the Alexander romance are all closely related Christian and Muslim variants. Philologists studying ancient Christian legends about Alexander the Great have come to conclude that the Quran stories about Dul-Kamine closely parallel certain legends about Alexander the Great found in ancient Hellenistic and Christian writings. There is some numismatic evidence, in the form of ancient coins, to identify the Arabic epithet Dul-Kamine with Alexander the Great. There is also a long history of monotheistic religions co-opting the historical Alexander. Finally, ancient Christian Syriac and Ethiopic manuscripts of the Alexander romance from the Middle East have been found which closely resemble the story in the Quran. This results in the theologically controversial conclusion that Quran refers to Alexander in the mention of Dul-Kamine. Two later Persian varieties of the Iskandername and the Aina Iskandari of Amir Khusrau Slavonic versions, in the Middle Ages and later, on the Balkans and in Eastern Europe. Also appeared many translations of the novel in Old Slavonic and Slavonic languages. This is how a version in Bulgarian from 1810 begins. Alexandriada, a story of the great emperor Alexander of Macedonia, son of Philip. God decided to punish those kings who had acquainted themselves with him, and chose the glorious Macedonia to make it happen. Translations: Burgel, J. Christoph, Nazami. Das Alexander Bucht Munich Manus, 1991. Half-Lanzner, Lawrence. The Roman d'Alexander, Livre de Poche, ISBN 2-253-06655-9. Southgate, Minu. Iskandername, a Persian medieval Alexander romance. New York, Columbia Univ. Press. ISBN 0-231-04-16X. Stoneman, Richard. The Greek Alexander Romance. New York, Penguin. ISBN 0-14044560-9. Wallahoshan, A.H. The Romance of Alexander the Great by Pseudo-Callisthenes. Columbia University Press.